Hello, welcome to the Diablo podcast. I am your host, Flux, and we are online at DiabloInkGamers.com. I am joined on the show by Neinball.
Hey, everybody.
And our longtime fan fiction, fan everything guy, HolyKnight.
Hello.
And this podcast is all about the story of Diablo III, story and lore and where it's going in the expansion, the Reaper of Souls expansion, and also we're going to touch on the Books of Cain and Books of Tyrael a bit. And we are not going to get into spoilers on Diablo III, Reaper of Souls. I'm sure that's heartbreaking to many of you listening who probably read all the data mining and already know all the spoilers. But people who haven't and who want to save the story, we're going to avoid spoilering it there. Although we'll do a little projection about what might happen, but it's not going to be too much wink-wink. Wink-wink. Gee, you think we'll see Adria again? Wink-wink, that kind of stuff.
Who knows?
You never know.
So anyway, this is the story of Diablo has the lore and the world story. We're not going to go into huge detail about Anu and the spirit and the dragon turning into the golden Parthenon and all that bullshit because no one cares except for Neinball. Do you care, HolyKnight? By the way, you like the fiction some, eh?
I've actually enjoyed a lot of the lore of the Diablo universe as of late.
That's why you've read all the Diablo novels multiple times?
I've read almost all of them.
Wait.
There's still some that I haven't read yet. I still need to read the Sin War trilogy. I want to read that so bad.
Well, just read the Book of Cain. It pretty much summarizes the whole damn thing.
That's true.
And you've read the Book of Cain. When did you first get into the lore and the story, Neinball? Are you like all World of Warcraft? I mean, all the other thing, Blizzard stories? Or are you especially a fan of the Diablo one?
I'm especially a fan of the Diablo one, especially starting with Diablo II when they kind of, gave it its own world. It wasn't just, kind of a loose story of, going down into hell and killing the devil. So, Diablo II, when it actually, got its own voice is when I really became interested in it.
So, Diablo 1, obviously that was when the story of the Diablo series began, oddly enough. And I don't know if you guys listened to the interview I just posted with David Craddock this week, but as he details on that in great length, in his book especially, nobody at Blizzard North wrote any of the story of Diablo 1, at least none of the basic myth. A little of it was fleshed out in the quests and such, but basically Metzen and some other guys at Blizzard Irvine pretty much wrote the whole story. All that background stuff, all the Sin War, all the, King Leoric and everything like that. And, of course, the great irony of that is there are many people, possibly including the guests on this podcast, who have often said, Diablo 1 had an awesome story, and Diablo 3 story sucked, and yet they were by not Blizzard North. So,
yeah.
does that...
It's all been the same people the whole time.
Yeah, does that shatter... Well, actually, Diablo 2 was by Blizzard North mostly, apparently, but it's funny that how much of the original stuff... I mean, even, you like the opening cinematic, everyone always cites it, just, the empty town and the whistling doors and the crow eating the guy's eyeball and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time Blizzard North, it wasn't even Blizzard North at the time, they were still Condor, but the first time they saw that was when it was sent to them by Blizzard Irvine's beginning cinematic department. And the same thing was true of the whole ending cinematic with the Soulstone and the forehead thing. Craddock describes this whole scene where everybody gathered around to watch this probably a video cassette tape they'd been sent from Blizzard Irvine back in those days. And they were like, oh my god, he put it in his forehead! Like, that was not the brilliant innovation of Max and Eric Schaefer. So, does that crush all you've ever hoped and dreamed and your foundation for life, Neinball? Say yes.
No.
Okay, HolyKnight will say yes.
Nah.
Okay, you're both on the podcast.
But yeah...
So it's funny, obviously it was all sort of a collaborative thing, and it evolved over the story and the quests and stuff. But it's not like there was some brilliant... I mean, basically, what Craddock makes very clear in his book, and what we've heard many times in the past, is that Brevik and the Schaefers just wanted to make the game. They wanted to make a rogue game with graphics. And we've heard them about the battles of, making it real-time versus turn-based and stuff. But they really did almost nothing on the story, and that's just kind of how they were rolling. And the story sort of was tacked in at the last minute, and yet was very compelling and interesting. This is where one of you guys talk after I've been bogarting.
Well, I mean, it really shouldn't come as a shock to anyone because Chris Metzen has been, credited as the writer for all of the games, and I believe he penned most of the backstory in the manual as well, which where like most of the backstory and a lot of the lore started was in the Diablo 1 manual as well as the Diablo 2 manual,
which was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
D1 manual. And you didn't play much Diablo 1, right, HolyKnight? You got started in Diablo 2?
Yeah, for me, the Diablo universe began with Diablo 2. I played Diablo 1 here and there. I know of it. I never got the joy of reading the manual. I might have to just go download it someday. And
Well, it's the whole thing's on the wiki. You can just go read it there.
oh, I'm looking at it now.
DiabloWiki.net, or sorry, Diablo2.DiabloWiki.net. You can just look at the whole entire Diablo 1 manual in there. And all the cool ancient stories about stuff.
Yeah, what is it? It even goes into, has like I guess, scientific names of a lot of the demons and the lords of hell and such, which is really
and how they affiliate with which of the primevals.
Yeah, who belongs to which faction.
Yeah, like one is the Goat Man and one is the Fallen and one of the other ones. All the monsters that we've never seen since Diablo 1 are in there too. I still want the Hidden to come back and the Horned Beasts.
Kind of surprised that Metzen hadn't brought them back yet, honestly. I mean, it'd be almost practically new to new players, considering, a lot of people, Diablo III is their new Diablo. Sad thing.
Well, yeah, given that nobody in the Diablo 3 team ever played Diablo 1 before they started working on the game, that probably was harder because of that. Oh, wait, that's not true.
Well, I mean, if you look at Diablo 3 has a lot more in common with Diablo 1 than it does with Diablo 2. Most of the events in D2 are kind of, like pushed off to the side where they are jumping right back into all of the points and hooks for D1 with, Adria and the origins of the Dark Wanderer, King Leoric, and all that.
Yeah. That's what's covered a lot in the books of Cain and Tyrael as well. We'll get into that in a minute. But so I don't know if you even want to go into the whole creation. One thing that I noticed, I had the Book of Cain for a while. I've never actually really read it. I just kind of flipped through it, and I read it carefully last week, and I read the Book of Tyrael also since then. And one thing it makes really clear is they really run down the whole creation of the universe, and obviously it's a mythological thing. And there's Anu is this like shining diamond, and then there's like a pearl inside it, and then it becomes like a dragon who's like the dark parts, and he dies, and the seven heads become the primevals of the forces of hell and stuff. And I mean, we're not going to go into the whole lore here, although Neinball could probably do that for 10 minutes if put at gunpoint. But
yeah, only if threatened though.
Yeah, well, I didn't stop you last time, but
I'll get the gun.
This time the threats were to stop you, not to start you. But yeah, I mean, if people care about that, they can obviously go look it up in the wiki and stuff. But I mean, it's really pretty well fleshed out. And one thing that I really noticed reading it is that it's very clear this is not just like Earth and some post-apocalyptic thing or whatever. I think some people who don't really read the lore might think that this is like Middle Earth, where it's just sort of like Earth with a little bit different with elves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I mean, they really thought this out as a whole different world. I'm not even sure if it's a planet. Do you think it's actually a planet? Sanctuary? I mean, we only the map only shows one little round area. Maybe it's just like a disk floating in nothing. And the laws of physics don't really apply to it.
It could be.
I always thought it was a planet per se, but
it's magic. It could be anything. I mean, it's got angels and demons and alternate universes and stuff. It doesn't have to be the laws of. I mean, it doesn't really matter, I guess. But I mean, you notice we've seen this one world map, and it's basically just one landmass with kind of a river down the middle. I mean, you could say, I guess it's a bay. You could say it's two continents. In any event, that's like Europe. I mean, it's a tiny little portion of what a globe would cover. So either the whole rest of the world is water, or there's lots of other stuff we've never gotten into, and I doubt we'll ever get that fleshed out in that much detail. But the description of it doesn't begin with the Big Bang and then 14 billion years of stars collapsing into black holes. It's magic. It's demons and bodies. It's actually kind of similar to the Nordic myth, where Ymir is this giant, and the earth forms from his flesh, and the bones the hills from his bones, and the sky from his skull, and the blood from his sea, and the clouds from his brains, and that kind of stuff. Where it's kind of a common thing in a lot of our Earth mythologies, which is much more inventive, by the way, than like woman from rib. But it's different cultures had their different stories, and some are more exciting than others. But one of the early things, all of the background before we ever get into the Diablo 1 story, which was really fleshed out in the Sin War trilogy. You read those, right, Neinball?
Yeah.
And how much of those flesh out the eternal conflict and all that other stuff before the Sin War, or does that just sort of come out in the other materials?
The creation of what we would know as universe, or in the lore it's just referred to as creation, really did start in the Book of Cain. The Sin War trilogy and a lot of the other novels don't really mention it, whatsoever. The Sin War trilogy goes a little bit into the creation of Sanctuary itself and how the World Stone played into that, but it didn't really talk about the eternal conflict. You see the demons, battling for Sanctuary, but you don't really get too much into the angels and their motivations until the very end of the book, and it's very brief.
And that stuff is pretty much just sort of an Easter egg. I mean, you don't need that for anything in the game.
No.
I mean, you get stuff in the game about it's. I mean, it's useful to know about the eternal conflict and how the demons and angels were fighting, and then the World Stone got spirited away, and then Sanctuary was created, etc. But I mean, you kind of get that in the lore if you actually read the lore books in Act 4 in Diablo 3. You know, all those books that are lying around.
Yeah,
Those describe that, and Lilith, and Ildician, or what the hell his name was, and stuff. But again, I don't think we need to get too much in detail of that because people who know it, and people who don't care. So. Even though I just did.
Though it is very interesting, and it's it's not that bad of a read either. If people are interested, it's the Book of Cain I think is on sale in a lot of places on Amazon and such. You can pick it up relatively cheaply now.
Yeah, and the Book of Cain fleshes all that out. As you said, that's pretty much where they kind of given hints of it in previous works and in Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 a little bit, but it seems like that they really, we need to get this straight. We need to get this stuff organized. And the Book of Cain really describes all that prehistory, and then it kind of summarizes the events of the Sin War, everything leading up to what happens. It also describes everything happened in Diablo 1 and Diablo 2, leading up to Diablo 3.
I loved the Book of Cain myself, and it did fill in some of the spots that were missing, and, well, since I didn't read the Sin War, it kind of helped a little bit to fill in that gap for me, and it made me enjoy the lore far more, than I did before. I love the world. Now I love it more.
Yeah,
and it's got lots of pretty pictures.
That too.
Oh yeah, the artwork is amazing. But yeah, I just even having read all the books and being really into the lore myself, there was a lot to learn because what was it? I actually had the chance to do an interview with Mickey Nelson and Matt Burns recently, and they talked, even though it was about the Book of Tyrael, they talked.
And those are the author. Who are those people? For people who don't know.
Mickey Nelson, he is I believe the lead. Creative director at Blizzard, that he's in charge of doing a lot of the story work for all of the Blizzard franchises. So, he worked on the Book of Cain and the Book of Tyrael as kind of like a overseer, getting the outline and making sure that everything shapes up properly. And then Matt Burns was one of the contributing writers to the Book of Cain, and he was the main writer for the Book of Tyrael. And they both have done a bunch of short stories, for the Diablo, the Heroes Rise, Darkness Falls. That was before the launch of little class short stories and such.
I'm looking at the first page of the Book of Tyrael. It says it's by Matt Burns and Doug Alexander.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So there you go.
And
what did you learn in your interview with these people recently?
One of the things that they actually talked about was. One of the questions that I asked was, the structure between the Book of Cain and the Book of Tyrael were very different. And one of the things they talked about for the Book of Cain was that a lot of that was all actually in Chris Metzen's head. That, they just got a lot of the writing staff together, and he just, spouted out things of what he envisioned, the Diablo universe. And so a lot of the ideas of, Anu and the Dragon, the whole creation of Sanctuary and such had just been, floating around in his head for the past, what is it, 15 years now? 16 or so years since the Diablo 1 that has just been, kind of had, jumbling up inside there that they finally wanted to get down in writing and say, this is how it all began.
So that's a good segue to my next question, which was Metcons, as we jokingly term Chris Metzen retcons. And I guess if he wrote the original story, he's writing the current story, he can change whatever the hell he wants, unless it directly conflicts with something in the game, in which case it seems weird. And the most obvious Metcon in Diablo III was the whole Prince Aiden. Instead of it just being a generic warrior who was the hero of Diablo I, it was actually Leoric's older son who came back from the wars.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
I think that was actually, and we joke about it being a Metcon, but I thought that was actually a pretty good idea. I mean, it'd be nice if they thought of it in the first place, but it did add a little more of emotional resonance to it.
Yeah, I thought
definitely.
it was great.
I've seen some people that still, like, to this day, that criticize that as some sort of huge retcon or whatever. But it's not really, because it doesn't actually change anything. It just adds an additional, like, emotional level or additional motivation for that character in Diablo 1. I think it does make it a more cohesive story, a more interesting story, having that background or that history and viewing all the events of Diablo 1 from that new perspective.
What do you think, HolyKnight?
Yeah, I knew about the warrior, and the fact that they gave him a name and made him this important in the lore, actually, I like it. It adds so much more to the stuff that it just makes it more cohesive. It makes it more well-rounded instead of just, it's a warrior going in and beating Diablo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, instead of just a warrior going in to try and defeat this evil underneath Tristram, it's this battle hardened son of the now dead king going into the depths of hell trying to find his long lost brother.
Right.
And that story is fleshed out more, or at least retold more explicitly in the Book of Tyrael. And of course, they point out that he had the horror of having to kill his father's reanimated skeleton, which I do every Halloween, but that's probably just me. And the other thing, of course, once he killed Diablo, it turned into his brother, who he'd been looking for and had been kidnapped by Lazarus, and then he sees his body that Diablo had possessed.
Oopsies.
And then, of course, the sad trilogy is he himself becomes possessed by Diablo and then gets killed in Diablo II. So I hope they didn't have any sisters.
Right.
Pretty clean sweep of the family there.
It'd suck for them.
Indeed.
Yeah, if there was a Princess Aiden, would you marry her, given that pedigree? What might happen next,
I don't know. That doesn't forebode very well, given the family history.
Yeah, so probably best they're done with. Another question. Adria got a little bit Metconned. She was just an NPC in Diablo 1. There weren't any hints that she was serving ulterior motives. As we discover,
there were kind of, because
she was mysterious and dark. But I mean, is that why spellbooks cost so much? She actually was on Diablo's side.
That could very well be, but there was nothing flat out saying, oh, she's working for Diablo, she's working for the evil. But everyone in town is always very mistrusting of her, and where is she? Where'd she come from? She seems so mysterious and such. And, everyone, questioned her motivations or how she was able to acquire all of her goods.
And as we learn in Diablo III, the game, and it's also in the Book of Cain, the Book of Tyrael covers a lot of Adria's back life. She was actually, you guys can correct me on the series of events, but she wasn't actually running the Coven at the time of Diablo 1. She was just sort of in the area experimenting, or was she actually in the Coven with Magda at that whole time? Before the events of Diablo 1, she was co-leading the Coven with Magda. Something happened, she felt, the presence of Diablo calling to her, and so she just left. She just up and left everything without explaining any of her motivations and came to Tristram. And the Coven was part of the Triune, yes? It's one of the leftover remnants of the Triune, which was the one of the ancient religions back during the Sin War, which was kind of like a giant PR campaign for the three primevals. Yeah, that's the whole Sin War book's subplot, which is also covered in these. But for people who don't know, it's an interesting. They say they're Triune summoners and Triune cultists and stuff in Diablo 3, but they don't really tell you what that is. Mm-hmm. And that was a religion that was basically created. Was it during the Dark Exile when the three brothers created that? Oh no, that was beforehand. Yeah, like thousands of years before that. So it was sort of the way that Diablo, Mephisto, and Baal influenced the human world, and they sort of set up a religion with themselves as the head of it, but of course in disguise. So the actual head was like peace, love, and harmony or something, right? It was the outward expression. Yes. Exact opposite. But actually, only the people at the top level knew they were worshiping these evil demons and sacrificing stuff to them. Basically, it's the Vatican as viewed by South Park. Pretty much. But then ultimately, the Zikurum faith came out of that, correct? Or am I confusing the two? The faith of the Zikurum came. That was the prophet. Yeah. Well, that was. I don't think that dealt with. The prophet was Akarat. Yeah, and he, that one kind of got Metconned a little bit, because before he said that there was an angel that appeared to him while he was, contemplating on a mountaintop, and so he was given this, the vision of how, humanity should lead its life, and then that was later in the Book of Cain, Metconned into, him witnessing Odyssean sacrificing his life to stop the eternal conflict from spilling into Sanctuary. But then was later Metconned again in the Book of Tyrael by, separating those two events by thousands of years. A twisted web they weave. And the other thing that we learned is, I'm blanking on the name of the first Lilith and the other, the angel that created Sanctuary. Yeah, Anarius became... Yeah. That all ties into Irina's NPC story, her as the follower. Mm-hmm. That she's finding out that he was actually an angel in those books in Act 4. But I have a whole question about NPCs coming up in a minute. But we're drifting a little here, but anyway, so is Adria a Metcon? I mean, we said there were a few hints given that she was this, but obviously they didn't have it all thought out in Diablo 1 or even in Diablo 2 that she was actually, breeding, incubating Diablo's future primeval form. That was all added in afterwards.
Yeah, I guess.
But it doesn't really.
It doesn't,
but I mean, I guess. But it doesn't really. It doesn't conflict with anything or contradict anything. So it's not really a Metcon. It's sort of like an additional information. I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've always viewed, retcons as you actually having to go back and make a change to conflict with one another, which this isn't. This is just, laying some story that wasn't there previously. That doesn't actually change any of the events that happened prior.
I think it makes a much better story for her because it's just like with Aiden, it fleshes her out even more so they can actually build from it and add to it in the games and elsewhere.
So one thing that definitely was Metconned were crosses and pentagrams. That became a whole thing during Diablo III's development. One of the many M-A-N-Y crises that occurred and broke out. Like, remember when the male wizard was wimpy and everyone hated him and it was the worst thing ever for like a week and then no one cared?
Starfish.
Yeah, the Starfish hat of the male wizard. There were ridiculous things that came out during this period.
Mm-hmm.
Colors.
But anyway, at some point during development, I think it was Jay Wilson mentioned that, we're not going to have any crosses or pentagrams, and then Bashiak made some big forum post about it, and everyone hated Bashiak, so that became a whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But they did remove. There were obviously a lot of crosses and pentagrams in Diablo 1, maybe too many perhaps. I always liked the loading screen for Diablo 1 was just a huge orbiting pentagram. That was your whole graphic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, that's why a lot of people whose parents wouldn't let them play the game. I think that's why you never played Diablo when you were younger, right? HolyKnight, your mom wouldn't let you. She's like, it's full of demons. And she was correct.
I managed to get away with Diablo 2 like that, with my main first character being a paladin, fighting demons and things, and now I play Pandaland once in a while.
But
yeah, so that's very wholesome, though. So they had this whole thing with, Blizzard saying we're not going to have any crosses or pentagrams in Diablo 3, and that was a mini crisis. But it makes. Okay, there were pentagrams. There's some game UI artwork and stuff, and some skills that actually have pentagrams in the visual, like on the skill bar and stuff.
In some of the the summoning rituals or whatever they are that are inscribed in blood in the ground, and some of the acts are still pentagrams as well.
Yeah.
My memory, I was actually have that in my notes. My memory was that Adria draws a huge one on top of Bastion's Keep at the end of Act 3.
Mm-hmm.
And she doesn't. If you go back and look at it, it's like they're like two big triangles that are kind of overlapping a little bit. I think the triangle is probably coming from the triune.
Yeah.
So they did. My memory, I would have sworn that was a pentagram. I mean, just from looking at it in the game and skipping over it 500 times when I go to Act 4. But it actually isn't. It's just they're just triangles in a big circle. So I think that and the logic that they gave at the time was that we can't have. This is not Earth. This is not this is not a mutated form of Christianity. It's our whole new thing, an original cult and original, it's a new world, it's a different world, it's made from a dragon's spine, etc.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't have, icons, mythology, symbology from our world, and that makes perfect sense. But at the same time, it kind of tied into that whole Diablo 3 is not dark enough, etc. And people thought they were wimping out on stuff. So
yeah, I guess it's that kind of balance that you have to maintain when you want to have some similarities with actual things that are in the real world to allow your audience to make a better connection to it, such as using crosses and pentagrams and such, and then the desire to create something that's your own. And so you create your own symbols and things of that nature at the risk of losing some of that connection, with your audience. And so I guess it's just a balancing act, and they opted to wanting to flesh it out and make it their own more so than having direct visual cues with things that we all know.
It makes it for a broader audience too.
As we mentioned earlier, the story of Diablo 1 was just sort of thrown together at the last minute, and they didn't really think of it going in. And they did, however, think of the visuals. The way the world looks is very much a product of the original developers. Eric Schaeffer especially did a lot of that artwork. But they didn't think it all through and think, here's an alternate world, we should think up new symbologies and stuff. They just said, hey, crosses, pentagrams, those are cool,
Mm-hmm.
These guys all grew up making D&D campaigns and stuff and just kind of repurposing existing stuff. So, I mean, it's just sort of like the default. If they'd grown up as Hindus in India, they wouldn't have thought to put crosses and pentagrams in the game, That just wouldn't have been their cultural, touchstone. So
that's a little Dawkinism that you have going on there.
Yeah, well, there you go, thank you. It's just a little, I should do it in an English accent. But yeah, it's not like there's some huge overarching theme. And obviously they called them angels and demons, but they're not Christian it's not Dante's Inferno here, So
Yeah.
I think fans who were complaining about that were a little bit, obviously didn't know much about the origins of the mythology, because of course no one did, because it didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
Until the Book of
Right.
Cain, there was no origin of the mythology. But yeah, it's just in retrospect that seems like kind of a petty controversy, in that. I mean, you can understand why people were upset, and we quoted Max Schaefer saying it was kind of dumb and they should have left it in there, and you can see the value of it. But at the same time, they want to make their own world and stuff. So I guess that's not really that is a Metcon, but it's just sort of a fleshing out. Moreover,
Yeah.
one of the
Definitely.
Metcon question, wasn't Adria like 50 in Diablo 1? I thought she was old, and then suddenly she's like 22 in Diablo 3. Very well preserved.
Oh no, but she had that streak of gray hair.
Of course, Cain was also old in Diablo 1, and somehow like 40 years later he's still old, and he's only 80 or something. So
Yeah.
they seem like they changed. Of course, with the resolution of the graphics, who could tell, right?
I mean, it was just cartoony, so it was just far too cartoony and colorful. You couldn't make anything out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They only had 256 colors of Diablo 1, on the old Super VGA graphics. And ironically, 244 of them were black, so it was just that dark. One other thing on that topic that came up in the in David Craddock's book, he had quotes from Kelly Johnson, who was one of the original artists, who did Deckard Cain's model. And Kelly also did a lot of the Diablo II stuff. He did the fetish shamans and the paladin and stuff. And he himself is black. And, the paladin was black in the game, which is pretty unusual. And he said it was nice to make Deckard Cain because you very seldom see a black character in a fantasy book. I'm like, wait, what? So Deckard Cain was black in Diablo 1.
That was actually one of the things that surprised me going into Diablo 3, is because, I mean, in Diablo 1 and even in Diablo 2, he looks like he's a black guy. He doesn't look white. If you go back and look at him, he's just, he looks like an old black dude with graying hair on his side in Diablo 1.
I didn't even
I thought he
realize
was just
it.
sort of weathered.
Yeah, I
and
thought it
tanned.
was. Yeah, I thought it was just-
I'm glad I wasn't just imagining that, though. That is kind of nice to learn that, definitely.
So there's definitely a Metcon, I guess. Maybe they just didn't even realize it. I mean, obviously Kelly wasn't there to tell them, and as you said, I couldn't really tell it in the game.
Well, you can only see so much with the colors you had at the time, so yeah.
Yeah, so now we see concept art for now, and he's this old white guy, but he's kind of become ageless and raceless as old as he is. But the funny thing about the spoilers of Diablo 3, we're not going to go into spoilers, as I said, but Ellie's been posting videos. We've been data mining all the stuff from Reaper of Souls and putting videos like with slideshows of stuff up on our YouTube channel. And she put one up there and said, Reaper of Souls, images, spoiler, Adria, other stuff on it. And people were like, you screwed up your warning tag. It says Adria. That's the spoiler. Ellie was like, what? Like, she actually didn't understand what they were commenting on.
Uh-huh.
And she finally was like, why would Adria be a spoiler? Everybody knew Adria was going to be in Reaper of Souls. I mean, how did she walks away in Diablo 3 right before the end of Act 3. Obviously, she's coming back.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and in fact, it is a spoiler because you see what she looks like in the expansion. And I hope I'm not spoiling that for anybody, because if you didn't think she was coming back, I don't know what game you were playing previously, right? But we're not going to say where or how you see her, but it was just funny that Ellie didn't even think of that being a spoiler and wondered why people were saying spoilers when she put a spoiler warning on it, and they thought that her spoiler warning was a spoiler in of itself. So
Yeah.
Spoiler section.
It's like one of those things that I guess some people are so concerned about spoilers that they just, they can't know a single thing. Like, even knowing the title is a spoiler,
And it's funny because there's a lot of stuff in the opening cinematic for Reaper of Souls that's not in the Book of Tyrael because it takes place afterwards. So we'll get to that in a second. But other thing I was surprised about the Book of Cain is that it really describes a lot of detail about the structure of heaven and the crystal arch and all that kind of stuff. And of course you see those in Act 4. It also describes the structure of hell in quite a lot of detail, and it's like the 7 different areas are kind of divided up by the 3 brothers and the 4 other the not so great evils.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like the pie chart of hell. It sounds like actually. And they really describe what they look like and how like Juriel's area of pain and Ariel's area of anguish kind of tie together, and you move from one to the other. But then of course there's no sign of any of that in Diablo 3 except kind of you get kind of a little bit of hell in Act 3, right? But I thought that was just sort of like a twisted version of our world of Sanctuary.
Yeah.
Right.
And so do you think that we are going to see they've given us the areas of Reaper of Souls pretty clearly. It's West March, and then it's those ancient Nephilim crypts where you see in the cinematic opening, and the Blood Marsh and stuff in between.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think we're going to go into Hell again, maybe in the next expansion, and see these 7 areas that they've described? Obviously, we had Hell in Diablo 2, but that was kind of a proto version. It wasn't really that weird and crazy.
Yeah.
And I think probably the artists want to do that. We've seen Heaven, obviously. In
Yeah,
Diablo
I'd
3.
like to see more detail in that world. You'd flesh it out and finish it all off pretty much in a nice sense.
Oh yeah, I fully agree. Actually, going through and taking a look at the differences between the different realms of hell, and getting in there, because I mean this is like what one of the I guess unless you really count Act 3, this is the only Diablo game where you didn't get to go to hell.
And one thing about Hell, did you notice the similarity between Act 3 and how they described Asmodan's pie chart section of Hell?
Yeah, it was the continuing spiral down, though it didn't really change like it does in the description of the Book of Cain. But yeah, I did notice the similarities there.
Yeah, as you said, they say it spirals in, and I guess that's kind of what the stairway is going down.
Yeah.
Because I'd never noticed that in the game. I figured that was just how he kind of terraformed Ariat Crater,
Yeah.
Helliformed Ariat Crater, I guess. But apparently that is, I don't know if I can't believe that's an accident. So, but I don't think that's supposed to be hell. It's just sort of a thing,
Yeah.
a design theme. How many shapes are there? There's spirals and there's not spirals. Now it's a spiral. So what do you think will be in a? The other area really well described in the books, and otherwise we haven't seen the game, is Skobos. It seems like they had a ton of concept art of that we saw in the early days.
Yeah.
It's where the Amazons and the rogues stem from. And maybe Diablo III expansion. It's not far from Westmarch either. Westmarch is just south of there. It's south across the ocean. So, do you think that's a possibility for the expansion? We'll go to Skobos to start with, and then go to Hell from there.
It could be a possibility, or Ura, however you want to pronounce it. That one, we got some concept art of it. It was the main location in the third Diablo novel, The Kingdom of Shadow, and even got featured in the original debut trailer back in 2008. They actually went through and created the city to put into the trailer, and it never actually made it into the game itself. But that's a place that I would definitely like to go and visit sometime. It has a lot of interesting lore behind it.
Yeah, I would love to see Array as well. I mean, they fleshed it out there. You think they would have the assets to use later elsewhere. So,
have either of you guys looked in the art book that came with the Diablo III Collector's Edition lately?
I think I probably frayed the sides of it because I looked at it all the time.
There's tons of art of Chaldeum. We saw early some of the ones they released showing these like huge sky bridges and stuff, and like the blimps overhead, and you really see almost none of that in the game. I was surprised. I mean, you see a nice overview of it when you're in the hidden camp. When you run to the edge of the camp, you see over like the cliff. You see all the top of the city and stuff.
Yeah.
But there was so much more artwork for Chaldeum that you never got a look at. All these. There was a lot of these nobles we got these pictures of in the first place, and the concept arts and all their kabuki face paint and stuff. But then you just kind of see them standing around in town talking a little bit, and there's just you wonder how much more they had planned there that just got cut out.
Yeah, if you look when you're going across the bridge to the Imperial Palace, either when you're running on your way to kill Belial or when you're on your way after King Haakon wants you and Leah executed, that you can actually look out and you can see part of the city of Chaldeum, and they actually put quite a bit into the little backdrop art that they have there, and you can either see some masses of people that are sitting around on the sky bridges and stuff cheering at you for whatever reason.
After you've defeated Belial.
Well, they're sitting there cheering at you after Haakon tried to have you killed when you hadn't done anything yet.
They just like to cheer.
Yeah,
cheer.
Happy people.
And one of the things, did you guys notice in that recent, I think it was PC Gamer, just like last week, had an article about it, a preview, and they mentioned that they tried to do random layouts for Chaldeum for Diablo III and couldn't really make them work very well. But they've learned from that failure. Now they're doing random layouts for Westmarch, obviously in the expansion pack.
Yeah.
And of course, there wasn't anything random in Diablo III's Chaldeum. You just went through that little main, that little plaza, and you went into the palace. So maybe that was part of the reason we didn't get the city, because they wanted to do more stuff through the streets and through back alleys, and they just couldn't make it work.
Yeah, that was very interesting. That never even thought about it. How they were talking that the actual having the buildings and having to shift the camera through buildings of them appearing and disappearing as the camera would move through them became very distracting after just even a couple minutes of play for their test teams. And the solution that they had to it was actually going and purposely modeling the tile sets of the city to where the camera itself never actually passed through the buildings, that you're always either looking at an angle down an alleyway or the buildings in front of you were like up on like a bridge or something like that, so that the camera was just skimming across like the tops of the roofs without actually having to pass through the buildings themselves. So it's like one of those things, I guess, you wouldn't even think of it until you actually got in there modeling it and started testing it.
Yeah, the lesson is always making video games is hard.
Yeah. But I mean, there's so many people out on the forums that are, vetted game developers, or at least they say.
Yeah, they could fix everything if we just do it the way they wanted it.
Exactly.
So moving on to Diablo III expansion and the coming expansion. No spoilers from data mining, so we have to limit ourselves a little bit on this stuff. And one of the things that we see from Diablo II, as Diablo III ended, the Black Soulstone, everyone was like, where'd it go? Did it fall off of heaven? It fell back to the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And as we found out pretty quickly, it just fell down to like a lower flight of heaven, and they took it in there. And the Book of Tyrael describes it. It's like a subversive. It's an evil thing. Like they're sitting around with their little Angurious councils and talking, and it's making them all become dicks. And in the case of Imperius, an even bigger dick apparently.
Mm-hmm. If no.
And then so that's kind of why Tyrael decides he has to get it out of there. And we were all wondering from the cinematic. You wrote an article about this for me, Neinball, answering some questions. And we talked about this before on a podcast. But where did this giant palace come from, and who are these new Haradrim dudes waiting to guard it? And that's all covered in the Book of Tyrael as well.
Mm-hmm.
One of you guys want to run over that in 1 minute or less? Okay, 2 minutes.
Took it over 9.
Okay, I might need 3. But the place that we see in the actual Reaper of Souls cinematic trailer, we now know in the Book of Tyrael, is actually an ancient Nephilim city that was, of course, created when Sanctuary was first being created. Created when it was being created. That makes sense. But the reason why Tyrael picked this place is because it had ancient protective wards. Because when the Nephilim, begin to get assaulted by the original angels and demons that had become, frightful of their powers, they put wards around it to protect them that prevented demons and angels from entering the grounds.
And since Tyrael's a human, he can go there now, and he thought this will protect it from angels and demons.
Exactly.
So therefore, when Malthael showed up, he was a little surprised.
Yep. And then when Eldruin passed through him and didn't touch him, he was again a little bit surprised.
And that's because Eldruin can't harm things of pure intent, basically.
Yeah, of righteous intent.
Righteous, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So wouldn't it seem like demons have righteous intent? They righteously want to kill you. How does the sword? It's like the righteous detector in it doesn't ping properly.
It's righteous from an angel's perspective. It's more. Its moral compass points towards angels.
Apparently, yeah, and doesn't work against Malthael. And then, of course, the other question was, why doesn't he kill Tyrael? And it's like he tastes his soul and he realizes he's not a demon, or he's not, impureness.
Yeah, it doesn't have the demonic taint to him. Because, as we, I guess this isn't really a spoiler, because they've been talking about it on the forums and on Twitter and Facebook, and they've just flat out said it. The reason why Malthael is taking the Black Soulstone is, coming in besieging Westmarch is because he views the Nephilim humans as demons, because we're all half demon. So we're the largest, most powerful factions of demons that's left in creation. He wants to end the eternal conflict, so he sees it rightfully so as, well, if I want to kill all the demons, I got to knock out these guys. And so that's why he's coming to try and, wipe out humanity.
And he is, from what else they've told us about, the setting of Westmarch and stuff, Malthael, I guess we shouldn't say he, they don't really have a gender, unless, of course, they become Leah, in which case they have breasts. But he's sort of like mutating humans into monsters, which is pretty much what the demons do themselves, right? Because, you're fighting angels and you're fighting, like, mutated humans in Reaper of Souls. So how does Malthael mutate humans into monsters? Is that covered in the lore?
It's not really covered, the actual origins of, like, undead creatures and stuff. They don't really cover too much into that. Though, from some of the developer interviews at Gamescom, they referred to them as undead constructs. So it's more so seems that they rip the souls out of the bodies, and then, Malthael is using some other force with which to animate them and, bend them to his will.
Just like my first wife. And also, we were wondering where he got these new Haradrim. How did he train these guys in a week? And you were speculating maybe there was like a secret bunch of them that no one knew about. And of course, the Book of Tyrael says that, there was like some secret order that Cain didn't know about, conveniently enough.
It was actually funny. I think I remember on the podcast when we were talking about that, I said that there was that, kind of false Haradric order that they talked about in the novel The Order that was created, but it was just a group of scholars. They weren't a bunch of warriors, and, these guys at least seem to have some form of martial prowess. So, I guess it could be them, but it didn't sound likely. And then, of course, I ended up being wrong, and it is them. So the first ones, as they were called, the group that got founded over in, I believe the town was Galkul, is that just, it's a group of scholars that found some ancient heraldic texts and texts and thought that, oh, hey, this sounds cool. Let's go and do this. And yeah, they are the remnants of that survived the events of the Order, became the new heraldic Order.
And they know how to fight with spears really well, as we saw in the cinematic.
Right. Yep.
So if there's a giant guy floating in front of you with a sickle held right at the height of your head, one of the tips: lift your spear up enough that you can block it. That's a really good starting point. Of course, I'm sure it would have just cut right through it, but it just seemed dumb. They just stood there. They just stare at him. Whoa, what's that? And then they get chopped in half.
In their defense, they weren't even wearing name tags.
Yeah, sure. They didn't have any defense.
They were just faceless minions number 1 and 2. And if we've learned anything from James Bond movies, they just kind of fall over dead.
I do kind of wonder. There's all stuff about how Tyrael becomes human, and he had to learn how to sleep in the Book of Tyrael. There's end notes from it and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's it's really hard in heaven because we don't have any food or drink or anything. So how does he get from heaven back to Earth again? Does he does Imperius fly him down there one day or something, or it just sort of happens, and then he can travel wherever he wants? And how do these Haradrim know he was Tyrael when he's not an angel anymore? He's just some dude who shows up and, yeah, I'm in charge of you now. Here's what I want you to do for me. Wait, who are you?
We just
kind of skipped that part,
He had them touch his arm.
That's true.
Yes.
It worked for Leah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he could project thoughts. So maybe he's just a really good hypnotist. Maybe he's not really Tyrael after all. Maybe he's really Belial all along.
Exactly.
Right.
That is probably the what is it? That should be just a meme in the Diablo community. And it's because I think I've heard almost every single person. There's been a theory or some sort of conspiracy that every single person is actually Belial, besides Belial himself in the game. No one wants to believe that the person that we killed in Act 2 was actually Belial. No. Cain is Belial. No, Magdala is Belial. No, Tyrael is Belial. Imperius is Belial. Malthael is Belial. It's funny.
And one of them will be correct eventually.
Eventually.
So another thing on the expansion on Reaper of Souls is continuing the NPC stories. I mean, we really can't get into these at all because they're all data mine spoilers. But Covetous Shin is still seeking the jewel, and the mystic stories. She's not even mentioned in the Book of Tyrael at all, as far as I recall, right?
No.
Mm-mm. I mean, they hadn't Metconned her yet, I guess. And Hadrig is dumb as a sack of hammers. No one cares what he wants. And the followers should be a little more interesting. The Templar, obviously, he's getting into that whole thing at the end of Diablo III, where discovering that maybe he was just brainwashed, and that's mentioned also in the Book of Tyrael. That maybe the Templars are just brainwashing people to think they had evil paths, to turn them into warriors. I'm not sure what the point of that is, because they don't really gain anything from having these guys be their warriors, but maybe that'll get fleshed out. But anyway, their headquarters are in Westmarch, so that seems like it has to come in some way, right?
Yeah.
And of course, the scoundrel's whole backstory is that his brother's in jail in Westmarch, and he thinks he turned him in. And obviously, that's the last thing you say to the scoundrel in Diablo III is, "I will help you, and I will take you, and we will free your brother," or whatever. So that's got to come in, right?
Yeah.
You'd think that part of the story would actually be fleshed out a lot more since we're going back to his hometown in this expansion. So
I don't see any real connection with Irina, though, to Westmarch or to Rakis or to this area, Nephilim. I mean, maybe there'll be something, but it doesn't seem like it's any real logical connection, unless I'm missing something.
No, I mean, there's no logical connection at the moment, but I mean, there's a lot there to be written, because out of all the three of the followers, we know the least about, Irina's actual motivations. Just, we know some of her history and, her upbringing, but we know nothing about the prophet. There's the of course, one of the theories is that the prophet is the same as the veiled prophet, who is Inarius. But, even that is just a theory. We don't have anything confirmed. So it could be that, she grew up in what became Westmarch, or, something along those lines.
I thought that was my opinion from reading the Book of Tyrael. Maybe I read it too fast, but that the prophet was actually Inarius, and when he came back in, his veiled form. Because she learns that he was an angel in the in Act 4 from the lore books.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And an angel points her to the scroll. So that was my impression, that they were saying that this actually was who the prophet was. It's hard to tell because the time flow is they've kind of metconned those thousands of years a few times in there. And it's was he 20,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, that kind of thing. So it's a little unclear, but shake the magic 8 ball again and we'll get a better answer.
Yeah, it's definitely, since the demon summoning and things of that nature did begin to start happening before the Sin War, it's And since she seems to be towards the early part of that history for the Vizieri, it could very well be that the prophet was Cenarius, but it just hasn't been clearly stated yet, so it's still just speculation.
So speaking of Mysteries of Irina, are we going to find out if she's a natural blonde or not? That's only in cosplay at BlizzCon after a few drinks. Okay, probably the latter.
Yes. Yeah, we'll go with that one.
Well, she giggles properly. She likes to help people.
Look! More hidden footprints.
Any other main things on the story? I wanted to talk a little about what the Book of Cain and the Book of Tyrael actually are and what they do. I think we've covered any other story threads you're leading up to with that we can mention without data mining spoilers.
Yeah. I guess the only other interesting tidbit, which I guess isn't really a spoiler because I talked about it, is the final place that we'll be going to in Act 5.
Yeah, the Pandemonium.
Yeah, we'll be going to Pandemonium and checking out the Pandemonium Fortress, and it is a lot different than what you'll remember it in Diablo II. That one has been significantly retconned, and what the actual Pandemonium Fortress is and what it stands for.
Well, considering all we saw was just a small area with a fireplace, incidentally enough, somehow in hell, and just a courtyard.
Not in hell.
In
Pandemonium.
Yeah. Well, in Diablo II, it was in hell. It was, Heaven's last bastion before hell, and now it's a realm separate from both heaven and hell entirely. Kind of sits in the middle.
Yeah, as you just pointed out, the Pandemonium Fortress is like where the Worldstone was and where most of the eternal conflict took place, thousands and thousands of years before Sanctuary even existed. It was like this whole thing, and the angels and demons fought over it, and they were constantly losing control, and they would remodel parts of it when the new force took control of it. And that was where Malthael has been chilling for the last 20 years or whatever since he vanished. And so people are speculating he's going to have like a whole fortress there. And they've pretty much said that's where the end of Reaper of Souls takes place. So it seems like you're going to have to go there and attack Malthael in his stronghold that he's fashioned over the last decades.
Yep. And that was, just picking off of some of the breadcrumbs that they left at the end of Act 4, saying that Malthael, probably was wandering, the empty halls of the Pandemonium Fortress. Because since the Worldstone disappeared and the Eternal Conflict was put on hold, that the Pandemonium, was just kind of left abandoned by both sides because it serves no purpose any longer.
Can you put an Eternal Conflict on hold? Doesn't that make it not eternal anymore?
That's true.
I guess they should change the name to No Longer Eternal Conflict.
Yeah, the temporary conflict.
Temporary, indeed.
So, that's the Pandemonium Fortress, and that's something that's going to be a really major area. I think there's a part from Cain in the Book of Tyrael talking about how he actually was in the Pandemonium Fortress, which of course was Act 4 of Diablo II.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But, the Pandemonium Fortress is like this, it's not part of heaven or hell. It's like another realm. I mean, in the fiction, they fleshed it out more. So I think they probably just had the idea for this thing in Diablo 2 and just said, well, we need somewhere. Like, it's really, as you just said a second ago, guy, it's very misleading the way you see it in Diablo 2 compared to how it is in the lore, and I think how you'll see it in Diablo 3. It's not just this little one-room town that's got a stairway down to hell, it's like this whole other thing. It's a whole other universe, kind of, and I wonder if we'll even have a town there, or if it will be like Act 4 was in Diablo 3, where you go from some other town to it kind of thing.
If we just go, based on all the other previous acts, the first place that you go into where all of your NPCs are, you just end up staying there. That's where you always just, hearth back to, which is the Survivors Encampment in Westmarch. So I guess, from all the other places, including Pandemonium, you'll just, go back to it.
Yeah, so it'll be a big set, though, it sounds like, and we'll have, grand vistas of battlefields and huge open stairways and stuff.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Well, you would be, wouldn't you? That's why you're on the show.
Yeah.
So the Book of Cain, we've kind of discussed what's in it, but I mean, if people are at all interested in the mythology and stuff, I mean, it really does. It was the first place to really put together all the backstory, and it summarizes everything from the Sin War and all the previous plots of Diablo I and Diablo II. And it's formatted as though it's by Cain's journals, basically, and there's a few pages that have notes that are written by Leah in the margins. And apparently Cain was a really good artist as well. Handy for that, right?
Yeah, I mean, shit. The craftsmanship and the line work of that for an 80-year-old, I can't even draw a stick figure, and he's drawing that with his hands shaking.
Well, you're young yet.
I expect to see a little bit of shaking in all those lines, but no.
And it's written as though it was all put together before Diablo III and then during Act 1. There's some updates on it saying about the stranger and stuff. So it's very much in the world in the book, and it's interesting that it's actually up to the point, right to the point of his death. I mean, there's mentions in there about how, you need to look at this Leah because I think it'll be really important later on. And what do you guys think about the whole with Adria thing, where Cain had done, as we see in the Book of Tyrael, Cain did extensive research on Adria. He knew all about her, what she was doing when she was in the Coven, and he kind of hoped that she'd actually left that behind and believed her story, but he wasn't really sure. And none of that's ever mentioned in Diablo III. I guess they thought that if they shared any of that with us beforehand, everyone would just expect her to become a traitor, and it wouldn't be a surprise when she did.
Yeah, even though everyone kind of was expecting it anyways, because she had that kind of sinister air to her, to begin with.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think that was like a Metcon, or I mean, they obviously they knew what was going to be in the Book of Tyrael when they wrote the Book of Cain, so they just chose and Diablo III itself. Because I mean, other stuff there's a lot of clues given about who Tyrael really is and the stranger and stuff, but that was not hinted at all.
They probably just saved it until the end because they didn't want to spoil it for us knowing about Adria, and we just wanted to hope that Adria was this noble person going after the primes and that kind of thing. So I think it was just held back just to keep spoilers from us.
Yeah, and it was convenient, I guess, probably. Who knows? Maybe it was just some of the lore books we never actually read yet. If you go look around Tristram a lot, you can finally find one, and it's all about okay, probably not. It's in the second room of Adria's cellar. There's the big book. Have you noticed that? It's behind the cauldron. If you got to click the wall a bunch, though. No, probably not.
That's how you get into the secret cow level, right?
Yes. You fall in the rainbow pit. But that's the Book of Cain. It covers that. It has a lot of more of the backstory stuff, and the artwork, the presentation is really nice. Obviously, we've seen a lot of pictures of it and stuff. And it's got all the, it just really fleshes out. It's almost like a novel presentation of the backstory of Diablo I and Diablo II. And then at the end of the book, it covers a lot of the lands and cultures. Basically covers the classes you see in the game. It's got stuff on the Dreadlands and the Demon Hunters and, the monks and everything like that. And that came out, that actually, as you recall, the data that got pushed back, I think they meant to release that with Diablo III, at the same time, because it does kind of give away some of the stuff in Act 1, some of the plot stuff.
Yeah.
But as I recall, they released that before Diablo III, after Diablo III got delayed for the third time. So
I thought it was just a good primer just to get everybody ready, to be quite honest, but that's just me.
Yeah, and I noticed that as a comparison, though, to the Book of Tyrael, which is entirely written before events of Reaper of Souls. There's stuff in the cinematic that, because the book talks about where he's going to put the Black Soulstone. Obviously, that's before Malthael says, hey, mine.
Yeah, and
so it's just, they formatted, obviously, Book of Tyrael to be released before Reaper of Souls, whereas it seemed like the first one was meant to be sort of a companion. This one's more in the background and setting you up for what's going to happen in the world.
Yeah, and that was part of one of the questions I had asked in the interview that I had done, and it was, the Book of Cain was more just kind of had the intent of, let's get a lot of this stuff, just written down, for the sake of writing it down and get this kind of fleshed out and as an introduction to some of the characters that would be introduced in Diablo III, whereas the Book of Tyrael had a much clearer, more concise purpose of going through and being written as, specifically this is, part of the lead up into Reaper of Souls, as well as somewhat of a lead up into the Storm of Light, the new novel they'll be coming out with in February.
The new Diablo novel. And that's the second one for Diablo III,
yes.
Correct?
Mm-hmm. Be the filler.
And so do you think we'll get a third one of those? Do you think we'll get a book of someone before, like the Book of Cain, Book of Tyrael, Book of Zoltan Kuhl? Whatever, before...
I'd love there to be one.
The next
I love both of these books.
Yeah, we very well could. The way that they've been doing it recently is they've been releasing a novel prior to the launch of all of their expansions for both... not just the expansions, but the games themselves, for a while now for World of Warcraft. They've done it for all of the StarCraft games. They're now doing it for all the Diablo games. So if there is another expansion after this, I, of course, wouldn't be surprised to see, a full-length novel. And, I would love to see another one of these kind of source books for it, because not only does, the Book of Tyrael, of course, has a lot of information leading up to it, but that's only about half the book. The other half, really goes into the timeline of Sanctuary and tries to give, times and specific dates to important events like the Sin War, the discovery of Sanctuary, the creation, all that, but then has a massive catalog, like an appendix of, NPCs and characters from the games, from the novels. It's just really extensive. It's
comics.
Yeah, the comics as well.
Too.
covers Jacob from the comics.
They gave a background, like just to give an idea of how thorough this is. They give a background to Pendleskin.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that part seemed a little fillery to me. I was like, you get the book in like the last 50 pages. I'm like, wait, I'm only in the H's. I'm only in the K's now. You're going through page to page, and it covers all the demons and stuff. I mean, obviously it's very convenient, but I could easily see that. And I'll be transcribing like 2/3 of that shit to put in the wiki. So that was maybe my personal bias against it. Like, oh god, more of this. But it was very useful. One stop shopping.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One question I have about that whole compendium and other stuff, they give like the official names of every character in the game. I mean, like the classes. I mean, obviously Prince Aiden became the warrior, but like they name like the wizard, and they name the rogue, and they name all the characters from Diablo II, and even Diablo III. Like there's the official name of the monk and the demon hunter and stuff.
Not
I'm not sure if I like that or not.
I like it.
Yeah, the monk is in there.
The monk, the name that they gave for the monk was the one from the short story in the Heroes Rise, Darkness Falls. And he is not the monk from Diablo III.
Don't you think you're meant to say these are the stand-ins? These are the characters.
Yeah, it's like there's like in those short stories, the barbarian is thought to be the barbarian in Diablo III, though it's not really stated. The demon hunter most definitely is the same female demon hunter in her short story, but the monk. And the wizard also, the female wizard, she obviously in her short story she's the wizard in Diablo 3, but the monk and the witch doctor are not the same characters. They actually in their stories reference the character that would later on become the class and the game itself.
The Book of Tyrael also has a lot of coverage of Tyrael, describing what it was like when he first became human and having to learn to eat and sleep and stuff. There was a paragraph on his first bowel movement. I thought was a little bit TMI, but I mean, we've all eaten corn, so we kind of know how it goes. But spoilers there. It's about corn, but I would skip that part personally. A lot of coverage of Adria's past and all the Cain research and stuff, and the Black Soulstone and why it's motivating stuff. And they call that there was never a name given, right, for the area. They call it Nephilim Catacombs. The warded area that obviously the ward doesn't work anymore, but. I was surprised they didn't name that and stuff. And there's also a lot of coverage of Rakkus and the founding of Westmarch, and I assume we'll get that fleshed out in probably some in-game lore tomes.
Yeah.
But if people want to know where Westmarch was founded and who this guy came, his march across the entire world of conquering.
I actually really like the fact that Westmarch has gotten mentioned as much, because I recently wrote a not as extensive of a summary, but because they obviously had access to more information than I did. But I had recently put together a lot of the lore and stuff that was behind Westmarch a couple weeks ago. It was really cool seeing everything that I had to piece together, because there was overlapping and contradictory stuff in all the lore, and I managed to piece together it rather well and made the right decisions and which should overwrite what in the retcons based on how it came out in the Book of Tyrael.
And you can't just change however you want and say that's the new way either. So it's much higher barrier of proof for you. So what do you guys think of the overall style and presentation of the Book of Tyrael and the Book of Cain? They're kind of this scroll parchment looking paper, and there's the art, but all the art is a very sketch type. It's kind of like if people obviously there's a lot of sample pages you can look at pictures of it online, but it's kind of like those intro character cinematics, the sort of the art sketch type, as opposed to being full color and stuff. Would you have liked more color photos and more, I mean, not photos exactly, but artwork that wasn't just this kind of sketch style, or would that break the mode?
I actually enjoyed some of the, there's some pictures in there you've seen that was very painted-like, and I actually like a blend of both. I mean, obviously it's a book that has sketch artwork in it, but if they added some more color and vibrancy to it, I think it would actually add to it in some way, but not too much because it could distract it,
Goldilocks.
Right.
I did enjoy the artwork in it, and that was actually one of the parts that I really liked that helps distinguish the Book of Tyrael from the Book of Cain, is because they made the sections very distinct. Like you can just flip it to any section and you'll know whether it's something written from Leah or Cain, because it has very elaborate artwork, very detailed, heavy. It has wonderful shading or light coloration, and the background of the pages looks like it's a worn like manuscript or something along those lines. And then you'll have the sections from Tyrael which the pages are much nicer. They're more vibrant. You know, they've been bleached white. The typeface is nicer. There's borders around everything, and all of the artwork for Tyrael sections is done by the same artist, and it's done in a very orderly, angular line style. That nothing is actually shaded. It's all, hatch marks in order to do the actual shading itself. But it gives that kind of like how humans view the world, and then how Tyrael as an angel views the similar, objects and events and things.
Are the pictures in the Book of Cain and Tyrael sexy?
Mm-hmm.
Are there hot chicks?
Mm.
Well,
Okay, that's a no.
there is that nice one of Asmodan in the Book of Cain.
Well, Asmodan's always sexy. There's an Andariel with her nipple clamps.
Asmodan body rubs.
I'm not sure I can masturbate to that, but I'll try.
Yeah, give it a shot. Give it a shot.
There's no art of the Pandemonium Fortress at all. I was surprised they didn't. I mean, there is, but nothing that was really noticeable.
No, there's just, it has one image in the Book of Cain, and that was it.
So I think they're saving that for when we see it in the game. I mean, it's not in the cinematic either. We've never seen any concept art for Pandemonium Fortress in Diablo III.
Yeah, I was actually surprised with, I guess not so much surprised that they mentioned it, but then later on surprised that they mentioned it with how little that they're showing us about it. It's like, well, we're going to tell you you're going to go there, but then we're going to keep everything else under wraps. So I guess it's pretty good at building hype around it.
And you guys both play World of Warcraft, so you already know what it looks like, right? Because there's a Panda Fortress in the new World of Warcraft expansion.
I should have expected this.
There has to be a Panda Fortress, right?
I've been living through these Panda jokes for, 2 years now with you? I should have expected that coming, but I didn't see it.
Do you actually visit a Panda Fortress in the World of Warcraft expansion?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, you've already seen it. Can you see the big spot where the Worldstone used to be?
Oh my goodness!
I guess that would be right over there next to the guild banks. It could fit right there. A lot of empty area.
Yeah, it's where the bamboo bar is, right?
Yeah, it's just across the way.
Okay, good. Yeah, so try and be surprised when you see it in the game, though. Don't spoil that for everybody. My one complaint about the presentation of Book of Tyrael is some of the pages are too goddamn dark to read.
Yes, that's like if you're colorblind, it's going to be a pain in the butt to read. You think they would invert the color text to make it like bleached in or something,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, white text on some pages. Because as Neinball was pointing out, the pages of Tyrael are very kind of a tan background, and the other ones tend to have, there's big pictures on the background, and it's sort of a smoky, it's like a burnished copper kind of color. I mean, it looks really pretty, but it's like you can't read this by candlelight very easily. And given that it's a book about Diablo lore, I think you should, given that it was written by candlelight, theoretically, right? I was reading some of this downstairs, sitting by the fire the other night, and I had to get another light and turn it on. I just couldn't read. I couldn't make out the text on some of the pages. So, and you can't really see the details of some of the artwork. I mean, there's awesome artwork, but it's so dark with the way it's sort of been sepia toned and aged. And a lot of the artwork in the Book of Tyrael are pictures we've seen otherwise released. The digital versions have already been released. You know what it looks like. It was a sketch mainly, but it's just some of these. I'm like, this could be a little. I'd turn up the shader a little bit if I had the TDF. The PSD of it still.
To me, though, when you see the pages that, like we were talking with Cain stuff and Leah stuff, to me, because you see the edges of the page, it feels like they just, like Tyrael, put a little bit of glue and slapped it on and said, we're done.
Given the structure of the book, I think that is the kind of representation that they're going for. That's the feeling that they're actually trying to give with it. That because this is something that Tyrael has taken notes from them and has transcribed them into this book, or glued them into the book.
Yeah.
When did he learn to write? By the way, he didn't know how to eat or sleep. He knows how to write. He's a quick learner, I guess.
Well, or he could have just had another. You could have just asked one of the other Herodric guys to write for him.
Well, angels. That's angels could have been writing things.
I don't think they were. I think they do it with telepathy or something. They don't even have hands, dude. They don't have hands or mouths or anything. What are they going to write?
Hands.
Well, not really. They're just sort of glowing black fingery things.
Don't you remember Tyrael in Diablo II?
Well, he's got to hold a sword with something. Yes.
Yeah. Well, but the wings. The wings are like hands. He goes through when he's fighting Diablo. He grabs them with his wings and is throwing them around.
That was when he had tentacles and tendrils and stuff.
Yeah, I missed those. That was one of my main draws of that character.
He had glowing tentacles.
No further
okay, so
comment.
any last thoughts on the... Yeah, the Natalia likes those too. That was the Japanese version. Of it,
Or did I get an import of that copy?
it's a, problem is they're all pixeled out, so you really can't see anything. But yeah. So, any final thoughts on the story and the lore and stuff? I mean, how much if Diablo III Reaper of Souls came out and there was a zero story and pure gameplay, how disappointed would you both be on a scale of 1 to 10? Yes.
If there's no story at all.
Nothing. It's Diablo 1 as made by the Schaefers and Max Brevik. You just go through and chop monsters up. I mean, obviously the story's nice, and I mean, if the story sucks, would you not? You'd still buy it and you'd still play it. You'd just be bitter.
I'd probably give it maybe a 7. I mean, I enjoyed Diablo II, and then the world just kind of started happening after that.
Yeah, I think I would obviously be pretty disappointed since I do care about the story itself, and ending the franchise on the story ending of Diablo III without elaborating upon that any further would be a bad way to end it. But I'd probably still play it because I continue to play Diablo III nowadays, and I'm just running through Act 1 or Act 2 and not really caring about the story that much as I continue to put hundreds of hours into the game. So obviously it's not like I wouldn't play it, but I'd definitely be disappointed.
One thing we can say from data mining without being a spoiler is that there's going to be an adventure mode and a story mode, and we don't know exactly what those are going to entail, but it seems like the adventure mode is not going to have cutscenes and dialogues and that kind of stuff, and that's where you get bounties and there's more like an open world kind of thing. So I'm assuming that the first time through it, you even have to play the story mode the first time through. Maybe that'll be a requirement, but once you play the story mode and listen to all the dialogues and read the lore books and stuff, you're probably going to be like, hey, adventure mode, and I don't really need to hear
hit the space bar.
Lockdown's backstory. Yeah.
I guess one of the interesting things about spoiling it with the adventure mode itself, even though it skips all the story and such, there is an actual story and in-game or in-lore explanation for the adventure mode itself.
Yeah, it's because Asmodean sucks, and no one wants to hear his goddamn pumpkin-head holograms again. That's the reason,
exactly.
Right? Okay, good. I'm glad I cleared that up for us. Okay, guys, any final thoughts before you go back to eating your Halloween candy?
Or I already ate all mine.
I ate it yesterday.
Have either of you eaten more than 5 pounds of Halloween candy in the last week?
All the Halloween candy that I've eaten was the leftovers that we had that Dylan came and picked up.
Well, that's the whole point, right? You buy like 47 bags of Reese's peanut butter cups, and you live on a dead end street and leave the lights off.
Nobody came.
Oh, nobody came. I guess we can do it all ourselves.
I guess we have to. We can't throw it away.
And you go to the dollar store on November 1st and buy 5 pounds of pastel M&Ms or something, and nobody wanted. No, I haven't had any. I'm terribly deprived. Yeah. Anyway, any final thoughts on the story? We done?
Do you have anything?
I think we're good.
All right.
Okay, you've been listening to the Diablo podcast. We are online at diablogamers.com and Moo.